Several bidders in 3 states, key in U.S. Barack Obama's life, are vying to become home to his presidential library. If this sounds familiar, we're going to try it again. They see the library as a potential driver of economic development. The University of Chicago cited a study it commissioned that concluded the library would draw 800,000 visitors a year and create 1,900 permanent jobs. For more about the impact of the library, I spoke earlier with Andrew Robertson. He is a professor in the history department at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Dr. Robertson, welcome to Arise America. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Okay, so we know that there have been 6 bidders from the 3 states that make sense as possible locations for President Barack Obama's libraries. Of course, Hawaii, his birthplace, Illinois, because he spent so much time in Chicago, and then New York, because he attended Columbia. Right. Which one, in your mind, makes the most sense?
Well, as a New Yorker, I have to say that perhaps my personal preference would be for him to have a library here in New York at Columbia University in their new West Harlem campus. On the other hand, I have to say, I think the money is on Chicago.
I think so.
And here's why. It's very likely, I think, that the first family, once he is no longer president, will reside again in Chicago most of the year. I think the sentimental favorite is undoubtedly Honolulu, Hawaii, because that was where he grew up. On the other hand, that's very far for scholars, and I think also for any kind of outreach program that he might want to do at his presidential library as well. It won't have as many visitors there, so I think Chicago would be the best choice.
That sounds like it is the odds-on favorite.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you, who is making this decision, and what factors are they taking into consideration?
Well, the Obama team, the administration, will play the dominant role. But in addition to that, it is a kind of political, but also a governmental kind of amalgam. And so the National Archives and Records Administration, what we call NARA, will be involved heavily in the selection of the site and everything that goes on once the site is decided upon.
And is it really about the site that makes the most sense, or are they taking in those, the cold hard cash facts in terms of likelihood of being visited, revenue that could be generated?
Yes, both those things are very important, and they're important to this president. This president, after all, started his career as a community organizer in the South Side of Chicago. This will provide jobs for people on the South Side. It will have automatic community organization right there. The University of Chicago is already poised to do that kind of outreach. It seems like a no-brainer that that would be the right place. I mean, if you're thinking about economic development in what is now his adopted hometown, that's the place.
And who pays for this? Where does the money come from?
Well, part of it comes from us, from the taxpayers. That's right.
So we should have a say.
That's absolutely right. And, people vote with their feet. I think part of this is because there is a kind of democratic input into this, because visitors, will come if it's a great site and it's in a big city. One of the things that we know about presidential libraries is that if it's a popular president, as this one I think will be in the future, and he's located in a big metropolitan area, that's when you really generate visitors. That would be true of FDR in Hyde Park, New York, not too far away from New York City, the Kennedy Library in Boston, and also the Reagan Library, which is very near Los Angeles. So those are the big 3.
Those are all the big ones. And it's really about location. It's location, location, location.
It is, absolutely.
And so I would imagine then the least visited is also about location.
That's absolutely right. Unfortunately, Dwight Eisenhower, who was in the Army through most of his career and moved around a lot as a kid, chose Abilene, Kansas to be the site of his library, because that's where he spent the most time as a young man. He might have had a better pick if he'd chosen Gettysburg, where he retired, which would be, close to a lot of tourists because of the battlefields. But Abilene is the least visited of all the presidential libraries, which is kind of unfortunate because he's such an interesting president.
And I would imagine that these presidential libraries have really evolved. I've only been to a couple. You've been to half a dozen or so. And man, the more modern ones are so completely different than the earlier ones.
Yes, and I think in many ways the most interesting of all of them is the Carter Center, because now that's in metropolitan Atlanta. President Carter, as we all know, did not end his first, he was not reelected, and he ended his term in a sort of an unpopular and really not fulfilling what he hoped would be his legacy. Well, my goodness, they have achieved so much in the way of trying to cultivate world peace. They've had all sorts of success there. And in many ways, even though I myself worked at the Kennedy School of Government, so I have to put in a positive note for them, I do think that the Carter Center is unique, and it has had extraordinary success.
Speaking of which, then, what's the primary role of the Presidential Library? Or are there a few that are important?
Well, I think the first thing, of course, is that it is an archival repository. That's what you and I are going to be paying for. So the taxpayers pay for that. That's administered by the National Archives and Records Administration, and that's so that scholars like myself can go in and look at all the papers and make judgments about the role in history of this particular president. I think President Obama has been talking about how, you hand it off, it's a relay race. Well, we're going to see his role in this relay race from one presidency to another after this is all over, and the verdict of history will be rendered over the next century. So it's very important to have that historical database, all those records. And of course, more and more now, they're not paper. They're all online, and they're all on hard drives, et cetera. So it'll be important to think about how we want to preserve those. But that's the most important, I think, public role for a library. In addition, it's a museum, and that goes all the way back to FDR. So you have memorabilia there. I'm certain that they will have artifacts from his childhood, growing up in Hawaii and Indonesia. They'll have artifacts from the school that he went to in Honolulu, which is a famous school. Then he went to Occidental, then to Columbia, then to Harvard. He was elected president of the Harvard Law Review. All those things, as they did with FDR, JFK, Reagan, they have all this wonderful, interesting memorabilia. So when you go to visit these libraries, as I have with my kids when they were little, they get to see who this person really was. And that, I think, is very important.
Also, these libraries, they also serve to sort of preserve the legacy of the president.
That's right.
And so what do you think will be the primary focus of the legacy of Barack Obama?
Well, I think there are two real possibilities. One would be to focus on the Affordable Care Act and to think about how he could do outreach to, make affordable care a dream come true, to fulfill that mission, which we're only really taking the initial steps. And this is something that is so important to him. So he may want to consolidate as much as possible by bringing people in to work on that particular goal. That's something I think would be very important. But the other thing that I think he might want to do is to have a kind of international program, a little bit like the Carter Center, but maybe a little different, for transformative roles that people have played in the underdeveloped world. I'm thinking here of Africa, Latin America, Asia. Think of all the people who are doing this extraordinary work in South Africa right now with AIDS, for example. The people who are working on assault against women in the Congo. Other, environmental work that's being done in the Amazon. I think that there are so many ways that he could initiate that kind of school for leadership. And really looking at transformative leaders for the next generation. Just as a kind of footnote, the Kennedy School of Government was the first person to bring in Benigno Aquino, who was the leader in the Philippines, who brought democracy to the Philippines and really started a contagion of liberty in the whole Asian Rim. And that was a very important development. So this is something that could really change history.
Absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to see what the ultimate decision is. And a president is going into the end of their second term when we all start talking about their library.
Yes.
Andrew Robertson, thank you so much. So fascinating.
My pleasure. Thank you.